important thing. I understand that Canada is leading the world in terms of dark sky preserve, so we want to keep moving that right direction, be a role model for the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so are we ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay. So we will start by asking you to tell us your name and spelling it for us.
Robert Thirsk, R-O-B-E-R-T, Thirsk, T-H-I-R-S-K.
Let's start by hearing a little bit about your background and growing up. Tell us a bit about yourself.
I was born in Western Canada. My family and I lived in a number of small towns in British Columbia and in the prairies. My father was in sales, and whenever he got promoted, we moved to another location. We're a family that was outdoors oriented. We enjoyed camping, and we enjoyed water sports as well. My parents were great role models for me. My father was a dreamer. My mother was the practical person that helps to put plans in place. So, of course, like any child, I learned how to play my parents. When I had an idea on something outrageous that I wanted to do, I'd go see my father first. And then he'd say, yeah, go for it, and then he'd tell me to go see my mother and tell me how to put a plan in place. So definitely the landscape, the sky, the ideology, the mindset of Western Canada played a big role in the person that I am today.
In a sense, it's almost like they say the best sailors come from the prairies because they don't mind that big open vastness. Would you say that's the same for yourself, going into space?
My father was one of those prairie boys that you just mentioned, and he served in the Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, during World War II. And many of the sailors were from the prairies, probably for the reason that you just said. For me, no, probably not. I think what was very influential for me was the mountains of the West. And any opportunity I had to climb a mountain, to get up high and then look down, that was an opportunity that I chased as well. And then, of course, the temperate rainforests as well. Running around those forests when I was young and discovering the wildlife and the flora was a highlight for me.
Did you study that when you were at university?
No, so I'm a child of the 1960s and 70s, and it was a marvelous time to be young then. The world was so much different then than it is today. Things were moving fast on a number of fronts, civil rights and science and technology, entertainment. That's when the Sgt. Pepper album came out, for example. But also space. In 1961, the first human being flew in space, a short one-orbit trip. And 8 years later, 2 people walked on the moon. And I was impressed by those Apollo astronauts and by those early cosmonauts. And they got me interested in the notion of exploration and also the importance of science, technology, engineering, and math for my educational path and career. So I started off in engineering. I had this fuzzy ambition to become an astronaut. I was a Canadian. It wasn't Canadians that were flying in space, but the initial fascination with this explosive era of space exploration caught my attention.
So you went into mechanical engineering, and then what?
In my 3rd or 4th year of undergraduate engineering, one of my professors took me aside and he said, I see something different in you. What are your life ambitions? What are your career objectives? So I told him that I was interested in the space program. And he said, a lot of the obstacles preventing us from going deeper into space are medical obstacles. The human body is adapted to 1G. It's not adapted to weightlessness and the other environmental parameters of space flight. So he said, I recommend you go off to medical school. And then the combination of the two, engineering and medicine, would allow you to apply some of the engineering principles, methodologies that I've learned to solving some of these medical problems of space flight. So he caught me by surprise. In a million years, I'd never considered going to medical school. But the more I thought about it, the more his suggestion made sense to me. So I went off to MIT. I did another engineering degree, picked up the pre-med courses, wrote the admission exams, and then went off to medical school at McGill University in Montreal.
Did you ever practice as a doctor?
Yes, so I was practicing in a small town in New Brunswick, and on a Saturday morning, I remember I finished my rounds, and I went into the doctor's lounge, and I picked up the newspaper from the coffee table, opened it up, and there was this ad that said Canada was recruiting astronauts. And so this dream that I had when I was in grade 3 about becoming an astronaut suddenly came to the forefront again. And I read the ad, and a lot of the qualifications, educational experience qualifications, were what I had. So I applied. 4,000 other people applied as well. And then over 8 or 9 months of cuts, I eventually, fortunately, was selected to be one of the first members of the Canadian Astronaut Corps.
What kinds of things did you have to do in order to make it through that recruitment period? As they winnowed everybody away.
Yeah, well, medical qualifications are very important. So we had a series of medical exams, which started off something relatively simple. In your family doctor's office, they would do a quick exam just to make sure that we didn't have any major medical showstoppers. And then towards the end, toward the 8th, the 9th month, we were spending a week or two in hospitals, the final 19 of us, and they probed every single orifice in our body. And, there's a lot of unknowns about what the space environment does to the human body, so we might have been a little bit excessive in those early days. Certainly there are some types of medical maladies, medical syndromes that we can have here on Earth and function perfectly well in society. But in space, some of these things could become an emergency situation that would require us to abort a mission. So a history of kidney stones, epilepsy, diabetes, coronary artery disease, those would certainly disqualify you from being an astronaut. And so we had to rule those out. Public speaking, communications is part of the astronaut role as well. We like astronauts to convey the excitement of exploration, and the importance of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math careers to young people. And then explain to politicians why it's important, why it benefits Canada to invest in spaceflight, the economy, but also science and technology spin-offs as well. So there are some communication exercises for us. We didn't realize it at the time, but there was a number of social events as well, cocktail receptions with VIPs and politicians, and we thought we were just there to meet people. No, we were being watched to make sure that we had the diplomacy and decorum, and then of course university transcripts and reference letters and things like that. That's all very important.
I'm going to pause for a moment because I think our door is still open. If you can just check, because I'm hearing noise.
No.
No, it's closed.
I think you just have exceptional hearing.
Okay.
It's an old building.
Okay.
Sound isolation is not that good.
The mic isn't picking anything up. It sounds fine.
So when we were talking on the phone earlier, one of the things you mentioned is, because I asked you about astronomy and concerns about dark sky preserves, that sort of thing, and you said, well, I'm not an astronomer, I'm an astronaut. So just define what you see as being the difference between being an astronomer and an astronaut.
Well, first of all, astronomers are much smarter than astronauts. Astronomers are those scientists, philosophers who try to answer the big questions that society has. Where did we come from? Where are we going? What's the nature of the universe? Are we, humanity, alone in the universe? And of course, their main tools are things like telescopes and space probes. Astronauts are the people who are interested in getting out there into space and exploring and taking civilization to this vision that we can extend human capability off the planet and into space as well. Astronauts believe that the Earth is just a cradle, and that someday we will explore the inner solar system. Someday we will populate other heavenly bodies, and our great-great-grandchildren are probably going to go interstellar as well. So That's what we do. We're the people who push the buttons and turn the valves and get the spacecraft out there to explore and satisfy our curiosity about what's out there.
So when you were younger, did you spend time like camping and looking out at the sky, at the stars? Was that an interest of yours when you were young?
Yes, my parents were very good about exposing us to the outdoors. We lived in a lot of small towns, and when I would come home from school at the end of the day, it wasn't to go inside and play video games or watch TV. It was outside, into the forest, and grab our rowboat and roll out and go fishing or dive for oysters. That's what life was for me. Our family vacations were to Jasper, to Banff, to Radium, to other remote locations where you can look up at night and you can see this field full of stars in the sky. You can see that shimmering streak across the sky, which of course is the Milky Way. And then my father was very good. Whenever there was good solar activity, he'd throw us into the car and he'd take us out to the outskirts of town, and we watched the Northern Lights. Living in a place like, for example, Calgary, they're not overhead. You can see them off in the distance, but he'd explain to us what that was all about. Today, I live in an urban center. I live in Ottawa, and I don't see that. You know, you can barely see the constellations today, and it's a very rare situation that I'm in that I can actually see the Milky Way. But there's something special about seeing the sky in its complete majesty. It helps us to think and wonder about who we are as society, and to realize that our planet is small. We're only one tiny, tiny element in this whole expanse of the universe. And it gives us a different perspectives of vulnerability, about fragility, and about this notion of exploring and finding out what's out there and how we're a part of it. I'm a jazz fan, and my favorite songs are those that have the word sun or moon or Mars in it. A funny story for you is on the night that I was to receive the phone call to say whether or not I was going to be selected to the first astronaut corps or not, to calm my nerves, I put on, this is a long time ago, put the needle on the LP.